grab yourself a blanket because this build is real cool. That sounded so much better in my head. I'm sorry, I promise this is incredible. Just stick around. Hello, my fellow sorcerers. Greetings and salutations. I hope you fare well this day. Whatever build you may play, I hope it is going your way. I want to propose, though, a potential alternate playstyle that you might well not have thought of, that I am incredibly proud of, because number one, it was a cool idea I had that actually has worked. 2, it actually works really ridiculously well. And 3, isn't a traditionally current meta build. Okay, technically there's some ice shards involved, but not in the way you're imagining when you hear that. So how do you like the idea of being able to run through any dungeon, even nightmare dungeons, 20 plus levels above you, and not stopping at all? And every pack of enemies you walk past just kind of passively dies because they dared to be vaguely near you. That is what this achieves, and it is utterly bonkers, it is magnificently fun, and it is stupidly powerful. So what am I talking about? Well, you know how the enchantment for ice shards means that when you freeze an enemy, you automatically fire at them, and that's really nice. I went over this in my last ice shards build, how if you're doing kind of weak or your level content, you can throw on Blizzard instead of Deep Freeze, and use this effect a little bit. But since then, I had the kind of epiphany of, wait, what if that's the entire build? And guys, it's the entire build. As you've been seeing, you literally just walk around, dropping blizzards, and moving on, and all the enemies just die. They just passively die, while you remain unkillable, ignoring them as you simply run to the end of the nightmare dungeon to collect your glyph XP. It really is a good time, and it uses a legendary aspect that I have wanted to make work since I first knew it existed. But we will get to that and everything else. For now, as always, it's time to start with the skill tree. Now, you might be like, wait a minute, you're kind of at the opposite end to where I expected you to begin this. Well, I just wanted to point out that this is a shatter build, which I find really interesting because it's a really fun key passive, but one that isn't seen as often. But exploding, popping icicle bombs that used to be enemies is really, really neat, and this really capitalizes on it. But how does it do that? Let's do this thing. 2 ranks into Firebolt, both because we want the enchantments, of course, as fire synergies are mandatory on any sorcerer build that wants to do damage, sadly, and that gets us to our core. We then take all 5 ranks of ice shards, as this is our second enchantment, already both of them accounted for, and this passive automatic firing towards frozen enemies is really the engine of this build. We then grab the enhance so that they can ricochet, and then we get destructive as an extra source of vulnerable, because although we're not casting ice shards that often at all, it is still going to be on our bars, and it's a sort of emergency. There's like a single elite left on the screen on 20% health by himself. Okay, we'll throw some ice shards at him to get him out the way, or a boss damager once you have stunned it with Blizzard, but we'll get more into that too. Then we ignore the rest of this and head to our defenses, where once again, every sorcerer gets asked, so which defenses should you take for this build? And the only answer is yes. Flame Shield with the usual upgrades of Enhanced and then Shimmering for that heal. No, we don't need Mystical. This build has hilariously no mana problems. You really are rolling with infinite mana while achieving this. And then we grab Teleport with Enhanced and then Shimmering, both for the lowered cooldown and for that damage reduction. It really does help. We get Glass Cannon because it's just free, easy damage, and we're not really in danger while playing like this. And then Lucky Hit Crit Reset is also fantastically useful too. We grab just Ice Armor to have the extra cooldown, the extra barrier, and the extra bit of survivability, and then the key that is Frost Nova with the cooldown reduction, and then most importantly of all, a source of vulnerable. But more than that in this build, a source of everyone is now frozen instantly, so everyone is getting ice shards flung at them, so when you teleport with Raiment, group everyone up, stun them, and then Frost Nova, you just detonate them all, and it just is glorious. Then we move down and grab some extra lucky hit chance, as lucky hits are very important here. Align the elements, get 1 rank of protection. The reason being is we don't need the extra barrier strength. We are survivable enough without it, we can save the points, but we do want as much barrier uptime in general as possible, so we at least get 1 rank of it to get a barrier when we press our defensives. Then we get mana shield, as we're constantly churning out mana, even though we're not running out, so we pretty much always have this 15% damage reduction on. Then we go down to the star of the show, Blizzard, grab all 5 ranks of it, enhance it, and then finally Mage's Blizzard, so it lasts an extra 4 seconds when cast above 50 mana, which it will be most of the time. We get Icy Veil just to get to Cold Front, so when the barrier is active, you apply 24% more chill. Basically, this just means Blizzard freezes things 24% faster, which is very much what we want, as we are mass freezing groups with Blizzard to then automatically shoot them down with our Ice Shards enchantment as a general gameplay ethos here. We get the Inner Flames to get the Devouring Blaze for that 30% harder crit, and you might be at this point thinking, wait, Blizzard can't crit, it's treated like a dot. Yes, but that's not what we will be critting with here. We will be critting with the enhancement Ice Shards flying out, and another main source of damage that's a legendary aspect that we will get to. Then we come to here, we don't get an ultimate, we do get 3 ranks of Permafrost to help melt down elites, we get 3 ranks of Hoarfrost because everyone we're attacking is going to be either chilled or frozen, so it's a nice source of damage, and then Frigid Breeze just to help with our mana, as we'll be lucky hitting a lot with high lucky hit, and most enemies will be vulnerable as we attack them, so this is a good source of just spam your spells. Then, as I mentioned at the beginning, we get that Shatter, so when freeze expires, everyone pops and damages everyone around them. So you can see how this kind of flows. You jump into a group of enemies, you blizzard them or frost nova, they're all frozen, they're vulnerable, they're getting automatically hit by Ice Shards, they all die, they explode for more damage with Shatter, and it just is a chain reaction through the dungeon that just leaves icy bits of bodies in your wake. So, our bars look like this: Frost Nova, Ice Armor, Teleport, Flame Shield, Blizzard, and Ice Shards. For our enchantment slots, as I said, Firebolt, so every enemy is permanently on fire, both for Devouring Blaze and Paragon synergies, and then Ice Shards, which is, as I say, one of the biggest synergies and damage dealers of this build, to automatically fling them at frozen enemies. So, generally the playstyle of this, as you saw in the clears, is very straightforward. You move through the dungeon, you press your ice armor as you need it to survive and keep barriers up, you press your flame shield as you need it to survive and keep barriers up. Teleport should be reserved for a massive group of enemies, landing on them, stunning them all. Frost Nova should be reserved for massive groups of enemies that you have teleported on and stun them all. So teleport, Frost Nova, and then you just leave because your passive Ice Shards will kill everything. The rest of the time, you are just running through the dungeon. Oh, group of enemies, Blizzard. Okay, leave. Group of enemies, Blizzard. Alright, leave. Group of enemies, Blizzard. Okay, leave. Group of enemies, Blizzard. Alright, now I'm leaving. And so on and so forth. Just moving through, putting a Blizzard on every group of enemies, and then just walking away, and they will just die. Sometimes you'll have a pack of elites, or it might just not be enough damage, so you just stack a second Blizzard, or stack a third Blizzard, or maybe even a fourth Blizzard. They all overlap and they all ramp up the damage that's being dealt, ramp up the chill, get them to frozen faster, and you are good to go. And then in very rare circumstances, against a particularly tanky enemy, or an enemy that's by themselves and you can't shatter damage or collateral them with AoE, you just Ice Shards them down and then move on with your life. And that's the kind of gist of it, the long and short of it. Now, it is at this point that I want to draw your attention to a particular legendary aspect. When you cast Blizzard, you will periodically spawn exploding ice spikes that deal X damage, and your ice spikes deal more damage to frozen enemies. So what are ice spikes? You see, when I cast Blizzard, they are forming in the ground and then detonating with these white little splashes around the blizzard. They are ice spikes. Look how many go off, look how wide the range is. Every single one of them is splashing for massive damage against every enemy caught in the blizzard, and even more damage when they're frozen. And you might be like, massive damage? It said like 1,000. Well, the thing is, these ice spikes are affected by all your damage modifiers. So all of your extra vulnerable damage, all of your damage to stunned or frozen enemies, all of your crit damage, because yes, they can crit. Every single pop can crit, which makes them actually shred, especially when you start stacking Blizzard. Look how many are going off. It's just boom, 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 all critting, vulnerabling, multiplying up, doing more damage because the enemies are burning, and you see how it ends up just crushing groups of enemies that are flailing around, slow, chilled, and eventually frozen under Blizzard. It's so underappreciated and so actually fantastic, and I cannot recommend it enough as a real powerhouse on this build. So essentially then, you are killing people with two main things. Freezing them so your enhancement goes off and kills them with ice shards, and then surrounding them with ice spikes from your blizzard so they just get blown up and killed. And those two things in combination result in such a sweet dance of death, and I cannot get enough of it. It is such a fun way to play, and I cannot stress that enough. So let's actually look at our legendary aspects and what's going on with the gear here. We have on our weapon ice shards still piercing and doing less damage for the benefit. This is still very important as our passive enchantment, firing them out, is benefited by this, and it just lets them ricochet, hit more, and you know how this good is. You know how this good is. When you have an ice shard build. On our focus then, I have the ice spikes from Blizzard. That is what powers this, and it's what provides a huge majority of your damage that doesn't come from the passive ice spikes, and essentially is mandatory to get a good roll of this to play this build. We then have, when we freeze an enemy, there is a % chance that they become vulnerable. You might think this is a curious choice, but in reality it works wonders. We do massive amounts of extra damage to vulnerable targets. Everyone does. But the thing is, Frost Nova is our only way of making things vulnerable. And it's melee, and it's on cooldown sometimes, and we don't always have it when we'd like, and basically a lot of the time enemies will be freezing from your Blizzard, not from your Frost Nova, especially because the playstyle is run around, Blizzard on a group of enemies, leave, Blizzard on a group of enemies, leave. Not everyone can get the Frost Nova treatment. So this at least means that 1 in 3 of the Blizzard frozen enemies become vulnerable, and then take massive amounts of extra damage from the ice shards now flying at them, and the ice shatter pops from your key passive, and so on and so forth, and I found it to really increase the damage more than just more damage with barrier, or more vulnerable damage. Then we have another one that might make you raise an eyebrow, but is very good here. Well, Deep Freeze is active, exploding ice spikes form in the area. This is useless because we don't have Deep Freeze, and that's kind of a shame. However, your ice spikes have a 50% increased explosion radius. That is why this is key, so that when we do have them popping around the place, they hit everything, as without this, the range at which they have is quite tiny, and this also means that when we increase the size of our mastery skills, so our Blizzard covers a larger area once we get to Paragon, they still actually hit everything, because a larger Blizzard means a larger spread of ice spikes. On our amulet, you still, of course, want the control, so you deal more damage to immobilize stunned or frozen enemies. This is huge and is one of the single best damage increases for sorcerer builds just generally, especially as it doubles up if they're affected by multiple forms of crowd control. On our helmet then, we have extra charge of Frost Nova. As one of the most effective things you can do in this this build is teleport on a group of enemies and frost nova them. So being able to do that as often as possible is just a cheat code here, and that enables that to happen. Obviously, Raiment of the Infinite for our teleport pull stun. It's just perhaps one of the best uniques in the game, certainly Sorcerer's best, and it fuels a lot of what we do, especially here with that teleport frost nova. It really gets the job done. Then a very interesting use of Frostburn, the unique gloves. This is wonderful for this build. The critical strike chance is glorious, the cold damage is obviously good, the freeze duration here is what makes it magical though. Because enemies will stay a frozen statue longer, they get more ice shards thrown at them, they build up more shatter damage, they take more bonus damage from our freeze enhancers, and they take more damage from our ice spikes, and generally a frozen enemy is a dead enemy, so we want them to be that way as long as we can. And then the chef's kiss, pièce de résistance, the 5% chance to restore 21% primary resource. It is this, along with our passive down here, that means we have infinite mana and don't have to worry about any other management in the entire build. Then we couple that with Iceheart Briars, the unique legs. This is even more damage to frozen enemies, and it's even more freeze duration. You're getting extra seconds of freeze time with the combination of these two uniques, and it is a lovely synergy for this way of doing things. And then finally, Isu's Heirloom, just for that sweet move speed while clearing dungeons, and the huge amounts of crit chance it gives us because we want our ice spikes and our ice shards to crit as often as possible. It makes a massive difference to our damage output. If you don't have the Frostburn gloves, it's not the end of the world. Just put on a lucky hit, crit chance, attack speed gloves with either extra barrier damage or extra barrier vulnerable damage, and you will just have to be a bit more careful with your mana usage, or get lucky hit chance to restore primary resource on your focus. In any case then, let's talk stats and that goodness. Decoration-wise, for our gems, you want green on your weapons, you want rubies on your armor, and you want skulls on your jewelry. They're just the way to go. And as for what you're looking to roll on your gear, that's fairly straightforward as well. Mana cost reduction. It makes a big difference. Then we want lucky hit chance, either with barrier or without. Then we want crit chance. Then we want cooldown reduction, then we want crit damage, and then we want just general damage up. Extra cold damage, extra damage to stunned enemies, extra damage to close or far away, extra vulnerable damage, and then intelligence. But the real key is get a very high crit chance. I'm sat at 40% naturally, that's about a good place to be. You want a very high lucky hit chance. I am at 50% up to 60 with a barrier on, and I can't express how good that is here. Because our teleport is on 96%, if I have a barrier, it's now 103%. Which means when I use teleport on a group of enemies with a barrier, and teleport gives a barrier, so it automatically does it to itself, I just have a straight up 25% chance to instantly freeze enemies, which in this build is a dead enemy. I just instantly have a 5% chance per enemy to restore resources. I'm not having to do the usual lucky hit tiny chances, because this thing just has 100% chance at rolling the pure number. That is so good, along with all the other lucky hit synergies. Blizzard has a good chance at lucky hit at 50%, but it also only rolls that chance once when you first cast the Blizzard, not with every wave, so it's worth keeping that in mind. And then 30% mana cost reduction and 40% cooldown reduction just ties it all off nicely in a lovely little bow. With that, what remains is the Paragon board, and I hope you're not Paragon bored of these yet. Maybe one day I'll stop doing this at the start of the Paragon section, but no promises. Follow my path as you do, and then the first glyph you want is the Glyph of Mastery. The extra mastery skill damage is nice, it makes Blizzard hit a bit harder, but that's not why we get it. We get it for the 20% increased area. This makes your Blizzard 20% larger, which is a big difference. More ice spikes over a larger area, and it covers more enemies. It's just easier to hit everything. It makes everything run much smoother. Then we go on up, and we get the Burning Instinct board. This is for our Flame Enchantment synergy, and we head to the glyph slot and get extra vulnerable damage. All our damage is amped hugely for vulnerable, and we're vulnerabling a lot with all of our frostiness, and get the rare and magic nodes that you see that I have gotten, and activate it with the 25 dex as best as you can for you. And then we move up to here and grab Kindling for all of that extra flame damage synergy, and then run all the way right to get this board here, the Icefall board. Killing a frozen enemy gives you a barrier. This is why we don't need extra points in using a cooldown gives you a barrier. This means you are not only A, really hard to kill, but B, always have a barrier up for barrier synergies. On the way, you want to get Cryomancy for just plus 20% damage. But more importantly than that, these are the only two nodes on the entire Paragon boards that increase our chill application, which means plus 8% or 12 if we include Cryomancy here, faster the enemy freezes from Blizzard. That is really key. The extra cold damage is nice too. Then I go down here and then we grab some damage reduction from chilled enemies. Every enemy is always chilled. This really keeps us alive. Moving on round, and then we get more damage to chilled enemy, more non-physical damage. This is all just beautiful stuff for this board, and this is kind of where my Paragon points run out. The next step is to get the glyph to get even more damage to chilled enemies, and we'll return to this in a moment. For now, we go over to the left, and this board, the Frigid Fate board. This is where we grab the Tactician for extra % bonus to the rare nodes to power up the weakness node for even more vulnerable damage, along with all the rare nodes. Eventually, you can go round and grab Frigid Fate for more lucky hit chance, for even more infinite mana, and all of the good stuff there, but it's not necessary for now, or necessary for you to focus on. And eventually, you do want this for the intelligence too, so it gets boosted by Tactician. Then we grab the extra vulnerable damage from this little cluster down here. So, what glyph would you add to this? Well, you want Elementalist. This will power up the two rare nodes, both of which are very good, and give you an increased 10% damage, as you'll be always doing fire and always doing cold, and this adds up really nicely. After this, you would head to this gate, and the next node that we would get is the Enchantment Master node for the plus % non-physical damage, as they are huge gains to your damage and an easy pickup. We also can look at the Static Surge for the stun restoring mana, though we don't need it, and then the general stun damage up for damaging enemies affected by raiment, but they tend to just die instantly anyway, so it's not as needed as a rush. But in any case, when you eventually get to a glyph slot past this one, what you want to put in there is the control glyph to do more damage to frozen, chilled, and stunned enemies for obvious reasons. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is that. The ability to walk through any area and just drop blizzards on every group of enemies and then ignore them as you move to the next group of enemies and do the same, watching automatic ice shards tear them apart as ice spikes rain down, blowing them all up as they shatter and detonate, and it just feels so good. Let me know how you like this, if it's something you're wanting to try, if it's tempting you, but either way, I hope you found it certainly interesting. I am very happy with this one, I have to admit. Like you've enjoyed this, subscribe and hit the bell for more. Consider supporting the future of the channel on Patreon down below, and until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.